Just don't have a picture. And then
I think this is a different kind of meeting than archaeology. I
Doesn't
think
matter.
it's Snackers Anonymous.
Snackers Anonymous.
No.
Isn't that what archaeology is? All right, this seems to be working now. Okay. Hey, Matt, are you going to record it on your machine?
Yeah, it's recording right now.
Great.
I didn't even have to do it, Mary. It was already set.
It was already
Otherwise,
gone.
I would have forgotten. Thanks, Mary. Good to see everybody.
Hey.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Emily.
Hello.
How are you?
So many nice familiar faces and names on here. I'm just gonna wave to everybody and then flip the page and wave some more. Wave to the people on this page too. What we're gonna do today is the latest in our series of Do You Know What This Is? And we're gonna talk a lot about glass, which is sort of fun for me. I really like glass. I think glass, it can be super informative. It's pretty. It's all of those kinds of good things.
How that works.
But one of the things that is sort of, I won't say like disappointing, but it's difficult about the artifacts from the overseer's site is because that site has been plowed, the glass is real small. It's super, super tiny and super, super small. So I can actually show you. So all of the glass from the past excavations at the overseers just fits in the front part of this box. It doesn't even fill in, it's maybe a quarter of a box. And finding pieces like, do you see this one tiny one right there? Right on top of my finger. That's about typical for what we're getting. But what's okay about that is that the thickest pieces of glass are the ones that survive the best, and it's the thickest pieces of glass that usually can tell us the most. So the bottom or the base of like a wine bottle or a drinking glass, that's like a tumbler, is usually your thickest part. And then particularly on bottles, the top of them, what they call the finish, is often the thickest part too. And those are some of the most important parts for dating and for identifying the vessel, the bottle, the age, all of those kinds of things. So they tend to survive well. The other thing that survives pretty well is that, sort of the Madison bottle seals are generally survive pretty well because they're so thick. So we can get good chunks of them and identify if it's a bottle seal. It's that really thin, particularly if you imagine like a champagne glass or a wine glass, something that's very fine and delicate that gets kind of real crunched up and hard to see. And that just happens in general. Those are usually the hardest ones to find. When we do vesselized glass, which does happen sometimes, we count whole bottles by number of bases. So instead of saying we have 10 bases and 10 tops, so that's 20 bottles, we would say, we would count by the number of bases because every bottle only has one base. And you don't want to double count bottles because we're also always looking for a minimum vessel count. So we use bases because they are the thickest part. And so it's a really good way for information to preserve better than even the tops or the finishes. So I'm going to show you all a PowerPoint today that's really pretty similar, almost not exact, but real similar to what I use to train the staff with when we're getting ready to catalog glass. And that's what I've been using for most of these presentations. I've taken the ones we used to train staff with and sort of adapted them for you all. So I'm gonna pull this out and share my screen. And move that over, make this big. There we go. Can everybody see that? Excellent. Thank you. So I tried to come up with a clever title or a pun for glass for the, do you know what this is? but I couldn't come up with anything, or at least I couldn't come up with anything that was that was PG, because glass rhymes with, I guess, bad words. But so do you know what this is? Glass, glass, and more glass. So starting kind of with what we always start with, what do you need to help you identify glass? It is always really helpful to have a plain white sheet of paper. This is really helpful for looking at the different colors of glass, to kind of put them on the sheet of paper, see what they look like. You also need overhead light. And what I mean by that is literally just lights over your head, because you're going to end up taking your piece of glass and holding up to the light and looking at the edges of it. Light is one of the most important things. A different type of light that you'll also need is what's pictured here. And many of you have probably seen this, a machine that looks really similar to this in the lab before. We call it a light box. It's often called a viewing cabinet. And these are sold often to geologists that are looking to identify different minerals. And it has a light on the top that you can do to shortwave or long wave, and you put your artifact in the cabinet below, which is a nice dark space, and you turn on that light. And if the glass starts to glow, it tells you about the different chemicals that are in it. So if there's uranium in the glass, usually you can tell just by looking at it, but it will glow this bright yellow green. If there's lead in the glass, it will glow kind of an icy bluish, purpley color. And if there's manganese in the glass, it will grow sort of a greenish yellow color. And these are really important because they're helpful for dating glass, but also for letting us know how glass was used. So leaded glass is often used for tablewares. And so if you ever think about like that heavy, like crystal or crystal kind of glasses that has that heavy weight to it, that is usually leaded glass for the antique type. And so that helps us identify, what the glass was used for. But also things like manganese and uranium can help date glass, because those different minerals were added at different points in history. So manganese glass, if you ever find a piece of glass, a bottle glass, that's sort of a light pale purple, you'll hear it sometimes referred to as sun purple, manganese. We always called it sun purple, but you'll hear different kind of references to it. And basically what it is, it was originally a colorless or a clear glass, but over time, the manganese has reacted to light and given it that sort of purple color. And that glass is super dateable because as a pre-World War I type, because during the war, they started using those minerals for other things. So if you're finding that sun purple glass, it predates World War I. So if you're working on a 20th century site, it's really helpful to kind of know that for your glass dating. The other things you're going to need are your eyes, your fingernails, and teeth. Glass can be deceptive. You'll look at a piece and you might think it's a ceramic. You might think it's plastic. So banging it against your teeth, trying to scratch it with your fingernail, just looking at it, those feelings will help you. And then the biggest things are reference books and websites. There are so many people that collect glass, particularly bottles, but all different kinds of glass, depression glass, pressed glass, crystal. And there's groups and tons of information for all of that kind of stuff that's out there. So some of my favorite resources as a perspective of an archaeologist is my kind of Bible for glass is the SHA's and BLM's Historic Glass Bottle Identification and Information website. So this website is the guide to dating bottles for everyone. It is super dense. It is super, has a lot to read on it, but it is not the most visually attractive website, but the information on it is high quality, and it is fantastic. I use it anytime I'm cataloging glass. Also, kind of in conjunction with that is the Parks Canada Glass Glossary. So this is more of a printed resource. It's online in the form of a PDF, and I've put a link to it here. You can also get at it through the SHA bottle website. They have a link to it on there as well. But this is another one, and it kind of expands beyond bottles and gets into other types of glass. A lot of the images that you're going to see in this PowerPoint, if they're not of fragments from Montpelier, are coming from either of those two sources. They really go hand in hand with guiding a lot of the work that we do. Jefferson Patterson State Park's Diagnostic Artifacts of Maryland has a great little page about table glass that is also really helpful for getting at table glass identification. That's the same website I go to for a lot of other things, particularly ceramics and other kind of references. Even though it's about artifacts in Maryland, it is very appropriate for Virginia and really pretty much throughout the East Coast of the US. Some good books. Oh, sorry, I skipped one. There's also in New York, there's the Corning Museum of Glass. And I thought this was a really interesting website. One of the areas I really liked about it is they have a question and answer section where you can ask questions about glass, and their library researchers and curators will answer it. And they had a lovely little article all about what different minerals, like I was talking before about the fluorescence of different minerals in glass and the colors, why, in a really easy to understand, short, digestible form. And there's also really some beautiful examples on that website of historic glass. Some really nice books are Bickerton's 18th Century English Drinking Glasses, an illustrated guide. The Olive Jones's Guide to Dating Glass Tableware. Those two books are referenced heavily by the Jefferson Patterson State Park website. Those are two that they go to a lot and reference for what they have put on their website. And there's a newer book about bottles called Baffle Marks and Pontil Scars, which I just sort of really like the title of it. And that's a bottle identification. So that's kind of an updated, newer version of some of the stuff that you will see on some of these websites. But a lot of these websites are referencing these printed resources. They're really helpful not only for archaeological identification, but also for whole vessel identification. So if you have an antique bottle that you found in the woods, or things that have been passed down, or something that you come across in a thrift store and you want to know some more about it, these are really helpful, particularly the bottle ones. So there's 4 real types of glass when we're cataloging glass here that we talk about. Sorry, go back. Got too excited. Table glass, and table glass is everything that you would imagine on your dining room table. So those are your drinking glasses, wine glasses, tumblers, but also decanters, anything along those lines. Bottle glass and jar glass, that's what we find the most of, not only here at Montpelier, but kind of what is found the most of in the archaeological record. Glass bottles are used for everything from wine to liquor, to beer, to medicines, pharmaceuticals, kind of makeups or topical things. Bottles are used for mineral waters and sodas. So any kind of beverage, any kind of liquid is going to show up in a glass bottle. If you think about, we're also talking about a time before plastic. Window glass is something else that we find quite a bit at Montpelier. Particularly when we were excavating around the South Yard, there was a lot of window glass in our excavations around the Grove. We found a bunch of window glass over there, and then also quite a bit in and around the South Yard. But it looked like they had taken old windows and just dropped them in the Grove to throw them away. Just lots and lots and lots of pieces. And then lighting glass. So this is probably the rarest type of glass that we find, but this is the kind of glass that is associated with lamps and lanterns, things like that. So let's talk a little bit about window glass. It looks exactly like what it sounds like. It's flat, it's thick, it's usually kind of colorless to light blue to kind of an aqua color, like you can see here. This is one of the darkest pieces that we have. When you lay a piece of window glass on a flat surface, if you touch any of the corners, it's not going to rock at all. It's not going to kind of shimmy back and forth. It's a truly kind of flat piece of glass. It's not going to have any surface treatment, no real decoration on it. Now, of course, there are sort of elaborate windows like a stained glass window, but we're not finding any of that archaeologically here. And you wouldn't even expect necessarily to find too much of that in and around, even if you were excavating around a church, because often the windows, even if the church itself is taken down, the windows are taken out and preserved and moved into the new building. So unless that structure, was, bombed during World War II, thinking about, London, there's probably a lot of broken stained glass around there, but not too much around this area. You might also find what's called bullseye glass, which is one of my favorite types of glass that you can sort of see in windows, but also in kind of glass cases. So that's where they would blow out the glass and they would spin it out flat. And so when you look at it in the light, it almost looks like a bullseye of faint lines going around on this very flat piece of glass. And I remember when I worked giving tours of Victorian period houses, we had this amazing piece of hair art. If you guys have seen that crazy hair art where they would take hair of deceased people and crochet it into flowers in its original casing that had bullseye glass on it. And it was right in the window, so you could actually see kind of the warpedness of the glass, which was very cool. At Montpelier, we do have one original window of the oldest bit of the house in the house, and it's the window right off of Nellie's best room. There's that back little, almost like closet with ceramics in it, and that window there is from the oldest part of the house, and it is an original window, which is kind of cool. So next time you're on property, go look at the cool warpy oldness of that 18th century glass. I mentioned lighting glass is one that we don't find a lot of. I think that's just because there's less of it, but also it tends to be clear, colorless, and it also tends to be very thin. So it's hard often to differentiate it between bottle glass and lighting glass, particularly when it's curved. So you're really looking at the thinness of the glass as your clue for that. So with these glasses, and when I'm training the staff in how to identify things, I often make up little songs. And the one that always comes up for this is one of, I think, my best hits, to remember the difference between lamp glass, which is like a hurricane lamp, like you see on the right, and flat glass, which you would use as a lantern. So if you just always remember Lamp Like a Lady, and if you sing it kind of like a good R&B song, lamp like a lady, it will stick in your head and you will remember it. And it's always how I remember the difference. And you kind of think of a hurricane glass as shaped like a lady. So next time you're in the lab, I'll sing these to you. Chris often writes down the lyrics in his notebooks of songs I make up and then expects me to remember the tunes. So that does not always happen. So let's go. Why are you not going? There we go. Table glass. So kind of the basics of table glass are, it can be really thick or it can be really thin. So that's not really helpful. It's usually clear. It's usually leaded. Not always, but usually. So if you have a nice really thin piece of leaded glass or a really thick piece of leaded glass that's colorless, it's probably going to be some sort of table glass. It is often decorated, and that decoration can take on different forms. But this is where you're really thinking about your drinking vessels and serving vessels for drinks. Related, table glass is closely related to other household glass, so vases or kind of other kinds of bits of decorative glass. We don't find a ton of that here archaeologically at Montpelier. It seems to be that a lot of the, kind of fancy candy dishes and those types of things that maybe our grandmothers owned were 19th century. You're not seeing a lot of those fancy little cut glass dishes and those types of things. Just saw my internet is unstable. So if you need me to repeat something, just let me know. All right.
We lost
So-
you a little bit, Mary, but you came back.
Okay.
What you just said, Mary, about your grandmother's something or another?
Oh, like your grandmother's like little cut glass candy dishes, those posts date our period of interpretation here at Montpelier. So, which was something I learned, honestly, when I first started working here, when we were trying to figure out what would be the appropriate vessel to put in Nellie's best room, because there was a reference of her having horizontal candy and giving it out. And I got contacted by the curatorial department and they said, well, what kind of dish would she have? And so I did a deep dive on candy dishes and found that they didn't come about really till later. So, so that was kind of a fun adventure that I did not expect. I do want to talk about this sort of decanter that is pictured here. So it's the same piece in both pictures. And on the right where you see the whole decanter, that is a Madison provenance decanter that actually lives at the James Madison Museum in Orange. So when we found this fragment, this piece, our curator at the time, Teresa, sent me over that picture, and we were able to match it up, and it's almost an exact match in the style and size to that decanter. So really kind of a cool find to think about, maybe there being a set or similar vessels. Why are you not going? Okay, here we go. So a little bit more about decoration. Up on the top right, you see the rims with these little etched tulips along the rim of these lovely drinking glasses that have good Madison provenance. But there's different types of glass decoration that you particularly are going to see on table glass. And what I really like about this drawing, this comes from the Parks Canada book, but it shows kind of what the vessel looks like at the side and then also what its base looks like. So I mentioned that bases are so important because they're so thick, but they're also important because by, flipping it over and seeing how the shape is, you can tell if you're looking at flutes or ribs. So flutes, if you look at the on the left, it's kind of those dips in, while ribs are the curves out. So you can see those differences. Panels, you're going to have more like an octagon shaped base. We find quite a few kind of tumblers with that paneled or fluted base. Etching is probably the most common design or decorative type that we find on our table glass, like those beautiful little tulips that you see up there. And how etching is done is acid is used to dissolve and make those indentions of those delicate little designs. So it looks like it's just carved in, but glass is so hard, you wouldn't really be able to do that. So they use acid to dissolve that. And it leaves the part that's been etched kind of having a white sort of rough texture to it. And you can get really fine, lovely detail. And then molded in embossed glass, certainly we find that on tablewares, but that is the most common decorative style that we see on bottles. So if you think about when you see those raised letters on bottles, that is generally embossed or molded. So bottle glass, it's where we live, this is what we love. Bottles were used for everything, can be used for anything, were used and then reused and reused again, and not always reused for the same things. So what a bottle was intended to be used for is not also always how it ended its life. And so I think that's always a good thing to remember. There's many different colors of bottles, thicknesses, and uses. The very, very thin bottles are going to be primarily what we would call pharmaceutical. So they're going to have little medicines or tonics, and they're going to be quite small, often just a couple inches high. And like I said, embossing is the most common decorative treatment, and it's usually letters. It's usually telling you what's inside the bottle, where it was made, something about it. Probably the most common type of glass we find are variations of olive green. And that is often gets all kind of lumped into wine bottles. So wine bottles were certainly used to hold wine, but things that we generally identify as wine bottles were also used to hold lots of other things, and certainly reused. If the olive green or whatever variant of olive green is curved, we'll generally lump it in as a wine bottle. If it's mostly flat, we call it a case bottle. So if you think about like a bottle of gin, is kind of the best reference. That kind of square flat bottle is what you're going to see with a case bottle. So why were wine bottles green? Yes, to help preserve the wine, because that dark color keeps the light out, and you're really trying to keep, anytime you have alcohol, you're trying to keep the light out. It keeps the contents of the bottle, what's in the bottle, better. So if you think about even with beer, beer's usually in bottles that are similar to wine, but they're often a very dark brown. And that's really to filter out light. So if you think about modern beers, things like Coronas that are in the clear bottles, that beer is going to go bad faster than something in a darker, like a Budweiser bottle, which is also going to go bad faster than something in an aluminum can. Because the aluminum can is, we think of that as kind of the lower end. My fancy beer comes in a bottle, but the aluminum can is actually the perfect container for a beer, because it completely keeps the light out and preserves that beer much better. So same with the wine as well. That darker color is helping preserve the contents. So parts of the bottle are really important. When we catalog them, I always have everyone catalog the parts from the top down, just to make it consistent. But let's kind of talk about the different parts of the bottle. And it's sort of like the parts of a person. So at the very top of the bottle, the hole is the mouth, and the ring around the hole is the lip. So you got your lips and your mouth, right? That little thing that goes around the neck of the bottle. So you've got your mouth at the top, then down to the neck, and then often you'll have something that sticks out around it. That's the collar. And all of those things together, the neck, the mouth, the lip, and the collar, make what's called the finish. And the reason it's called a finish is because when bottles are made, the very last thing they did was put the top on. They finished the bottle by making the top. So that is called a finish, all those parts together. And then where the neck goes out, you've got the shoulder down into the body. At the bottom, you've got the base or the heel. And then often in those wine bottles in particular, you'll have a kick or a kick up that curves up in the base of the bottle.
Why is there a kick up?
Again, that helps with the taste and the content of the wine. So
Doesn't it make the sediment settle?
the sediment settles at the bottom in that little part, and the good stuff is at the top. And you'll see the opposite in like mineral bottles often have curved bases or are shaped like torpedoes or footballs. And as they are meant not to stand up straight, but to be laid on their side in order to keep the cork wet, to preserve the bubbleness and the fizziness of the mineral water. And I'll show you some at the end. So depending, those bases can really tell you a lot about the contents. So finishes are my favorite part of the bottle. There's so much variation, and they can tell you some really cool things. So you can see sort of the variety of finishes on the top, tools that were used to make the finishes on the right, and then kind of the picture in the front is the exact same bottle from the same company selling the same product, but with two different types of finishes. You have a blown bottle with a hand done finish versus a fully machine made bottle. And I really love this picture because even in it, you can see those little tiny bubbles in the blown bottle. You can see that the top's a little wonky. It's not perfectly even. So on first glance, they look almost exact, but those little kind of imperfections in the hand blown bottle are that clue that it's older and it was done by hand. So finishes also include how the bottle was sealed. So corks are what we think of the most. And I mentioned that those are really important, but you could also have stoppers. So something with that's not made of cork, but goes in the top and might be held on. For jars, of course, you'll have a lid. And then later on, if you think about, again, beer bottles having like a cap on top for a machine made bottle. But for these historic bottles, you're really going to have corks or stoppers. All right, so let's look at some finishes. The oldest type of finish, and one that seems sort of crazy to me, is just the cracked off finish. And it looks broken because that's how it was done. They would blow out the bottle and they would crack it off the top, literally just break the bottle off the top from the blowpipe. And that was it. They wouldn't do anything to smooth it out, to finish it, to make it nice and soft. So if you see a very old bottle that's whole for sale and the top looks broken, but like it's been broken for a really long time, it may have been one of these cracked rim bottles. A lot of what we see here is the fire polish finish. So again, you start with cracking it off, but instead of just leaving it to kind of cut your mouth open and be sharp and wonky, they would smooth it out. They would fire polish it. So basically they would kind of melt it around the top to smooth the top. That makes the very top of the bottle this very liquid-like shiny sheen to it because it's been kind of that reheating. It's certainly not perfect at the top. You can see the example here where again, it's a little bit of a wonky top, but it doesn't have that kind of broken feel that the cracked off does. Ground rims are what you find on jars. So they literally would crack off the rim of the jar and then grind down the top of that. And that allows for sort of a rough texture. So when you're doing canning, if you ever feel the top of a canning jar, it feels a little rough to your finger. That allows for that tighter seal when you're doing canning and pickling, things like that. So that ground rim has a functional purpose. Let's see. Where did my little guy go? Sorry, there we go. My personal favorite type, and probably the one we see the most of here, is what's called a laid-on ring or a string rim or applied string, any kind of string finish. And what is done for these is that you have the top, again, sort of that cracked off top, maybe smooth a little bit, and then a string of glass. So imagine a long kind of melty string of glass is laid around or wrapped around the top. Often that string is uneven, it's different widths, it's not laid on exactly straight. It has this very hand-done wonkiness to it. And that allows to create that collar. So if you do have a stopper on, it's something for it to hold on to. And attached to help keeping the bottle extra sealed. These are my favorite. I love them. I think they're super cool. We also find some of these flared finishes here. So you would finish the bottle, and instead of folding the glass out, you would let the glass get flattened out to almost a 90-degree angle coming out of the bottle. We see this primarily here on pharmaceutical bottles. That's just what I've seen it the most on at Montpelier. Although it's certainly available for other types of bottles, that just happens to be what we see the most of it here. And there is an example of one of these in our display case here. That's really quite lovely. So our next one is our applied tool. This is another one I really like. Again, like with the string, the laid-on string or the applied string, extra glass is added on to the top of the neck. But instead of just leaving it in that string, you're using a tool like the ones on the previous slide to shape that glass into a nice kind of smoother look. So you're still going to have some bubbles from that hand blowing or that hand application, but it's going to be a much smoother, even look, like you see in these ones here. It will look different than a fully molded bottle. Often the bases of the bottles are molded and the finishes are these applied tooled finishes, and you'll see the mold lines stop just below the collar. And the reason they stop is because that additional glass has been added. So, let's see, what do they use cracker and bottles for? Anything. Whatever they would use bottles for. It's more about a dating. So if you can think about like spirits bottles in particular. And then tooled rims. Tooled rims are, I think, are really neat too, because they are more recent ones. These are going to be your post-Civil War bottles, where the applied tool, that's going to be a lot of the kinds of bottles we're going to find around like the Civil War camps. The tooled rim bottles, this is going to be a lot of what we would find looking at sites like the Gilmore Cabin. So the finish is blown with the rest of the bottle and shaped by reheating and tooling. So what this means is on the applied tool, extra glass is added, but on the tooled rim, no extra glass is added. And the tool is just used to shape the finish out of the hot glass. And so again, we've got this lovely comparison here kind of in this middle picture. It's the same bottle of bitters from San Francisco, California. The one on the left has the tooled finish and the one on the right has the applied tooled finish. So you can see where the seam ends is the difference. On the tooled finish, so the later bottle, the post 1870 bottle, the seam line comes about halfway up the neck and then stops because that tool has used the glass and shaped it out, kind of blurring that mold seam. On the applied finish, the seam goes all the way up to the collar and then the glass is added on top of it. So that can be a really helpful clue. So finishes are just such an important clue, particularly when you've got two bottles like that. Again, same content, same company, different periods of manufacture. There is also additional finishes for more recent bottles. If you think about, screw tops and pop tops, things like that of what our bottles look like today. But these are the ones we kind of find the most here for our periods of excavation. So all of those finishes have to do with how the bottles themselves are manufactured. The majority of the bottles that we find here are free blown. So if you can imagine being blown with a blowpipe and a pontil, kind of all done freely. But there are also some molded bottles that we find here. And then there's, of course, fully machine-made bottles that we find in a more modern context. But let's talk about some of the ones that we might find here. One is a dip mold. So this is what you see on the right, or kind of the center image here is a dip mold, the top center. So basically what that means is the bottom is kind of the mold is shaped like a cup and the whole bottom of the bottle is molded. Well, then the top is added as a separate piece. So how you would identify these dip molds is you'll see a seam just below the shoulder that shows where those two pieces came together. So that's before the 1870s. So we certainly find those around here. You're not going to see any mold seams on the sides of the bottles there. The one on the bottom left with that open pontil scar, that's a free blown bottle. A good clue if you have a free blown bottle is that you'll see some sort of scar on the bottom from the pontil, so from the tool that was used to hold and shape the bottle during the blowing process. Sometimes they're really obvious like that one, sometimes they're much more delicate depending on the type of pontil they used. The other kinds of molded bottles we see are two-piece molds. So a two-piece mold, you can see here, that's the center bottom picture, you've got it, and it kind of forms the shape of the bottle like a sandwich. So you've got the seam that runs all the way down from the top of the bottle around the base and back up. And then of course, your finish could be one of those applied tooled finish or tooled finishes. And you would be able to tell that by looking about where the seam landed. And then the last kind is these three-piece molds, which are sort of funny because three-piece molds were sometimes 3 pieces and sometimes 4 pieces, but they all get lumped in together. But it's basically you have taken the dip mold and the 2-piece mold and used both of them. So you use the 2-piece mold to form the top of the bottle, kind of the dip mold to form the bottom of the bottle or the body of the bottle. And occasionally you would have a 4th piece that formed the base of the bottle. But these are really the key because you have all the different types of mold seams on it. So you have the one going around the shoulder, like the dip mold, but you also have the one going up the side of the neck, like the 2-piece mold. And if there's that 4th piece, you would have a 4th seam on the going around the where the body meets the base of the bottle. So looking at these seams give you really good clues for when these bottles were made because of how they were made. And they have these really lovely date ranges. 2-piece molds in particular, they're really popular in that early 19th century time period. Were the glass bottles made on site for the Madisons? We don't have any evidence of glass making happening here on the property, either in the documents or archaeologically. It seems like almost all of the glass is being imported, and it's generally being imported, if it's bottle glass, it's being imported with whatever the contents are in. So the wine bottles, all of that is being imported. And then the bottles, of course, are being reused. So certainly those, particularly the ones with the Madison bottle seals, are getting used over and over again because wine could also be purchased by the barrel, and then you could just refill your fancy bottles with your name on it. Let's see. So strange shapes and embossed designs make bottles super dateable and extra fun. That's just sort of my big takeaway. This one at the bottom here is one of those mineral water bottles I was talking about before, where it has this this is called a torpedo shape. So there's all sorts of clues that this bottle was used for mineral water. And mineral water is beyond just like a lovely beverage. It was considered like a health drink. So having good water from these springs, mineral water, was sold and marketed as a way to treat all sorts of things that were wrong with people. So mineral bottles often have this very blobby top finish, and then have a curved, or like this one, a torpedo shaped bottom. So they're, again, intentionally designed to lay on their sides to keep that cork wet, to keep the bubbles, to keep the flavor of the water all intact. So these are really neat. And they actually remind me a lot of 18th century olive jars that you find on ships that are, again, were designed with these pointed or curved bottoms to lay on their sides in the ship so they could be packed in easier. So kind of rethinking, you know, the shapes that we think of most associated with bottles and jars. I, of course, included the 2 Madison bottle seal, the James Madison and the James Madison with the capital I. Most of us all know the difference, that the one with the I was the one used by his father, and the one with the J looking on the top with the J looking like a modern J is the one that was used by the president because of the difference in the standardization of typeset. So sometimes it's what the bottle says, and then sometimes how it says it, that it can be used for dating. And then, of course, you find a lot of bottles, particularly bottles like the water, but spirits, other things that will say when they're manufactured, where they're manufactured, really important clues like that. And I'll show you some. I just love this picture. So these are just different varieties of shapes of bottles for spirits. So this is an image I got from the SHA website, the SHA bottle website, and they have images like this also for wine, also for beers, also for pharmaceutical bottles, also for soda and mineral water bottles. But this is just spirits, which I think is really lovely to see, the really wide variety of shapes that bottles can come in, and as they change through time, what's on them, what's not on them, from the very plain to the very decorated to paper labels. So really kind of spanning a long time. So I'm gonna stop sharing. But I wanted to certainly answer any questions, but I want to grab a couple of things just from the collection to show you all. So if you have any questions in your head, if you want to put them in the chat while I grab those things. So I was doing my presentation from home, so I didn't have this picture at home, but this might look very familiar to Jackie. And this is the piece of the bottle, or that is the piece of a bottle that would have looked like this. So while Jackie was here on one of our lab expeditions, she asked me, "What do you know about this bottle?" And I said, "I don't know." And I said, "Figure it out." And I sent her off with my laptop, and she did. She figured it out. So this is a sherd from the smokehouse excavations from the South Yard. And she was able to date it between 1825 and 1833, and it's a mineral water bottle. So it looks, by the color and the shape, we might have initially thought, oh, spirits or something like that. But the letters, I know they're hard to see. There's an H, an ampersand, and then CLA, and then underneath it, there's a W, a dot, and a Y. And just by Googling that, Jackie was able to find it. Jackie, I see you there. So do you want to add some insight to how you were able to do that, or?
Well, no insights. It was just exciting to figure. I guess we figured that maybe the W.Y was New York.
Mm-hmm.
Then for me, being able to put the date so clearly, that short frame of time was interesting, because the company changed ownership, and it stopped being John and Clark, and it became just Clark, or the other way around. I can't remember what they are now. But the fact that the naming was right there on the bottle, and they only used those bottles for a short period of time, that was really exciting. And also knowing what you did with mineral water, which I had no idea about.
Yeah, and what's exciting is there was a huge mineral water market in New York. There was tons of mineral water being produced up there and kind of sold. That was a very common place to get mineral water from. There was a lot of retreats up in sort of rural New York where people would go and drink the water and bathe in the water and, get rejuvenated.
Saratoga Springs is a famous one.
And so all around that area are tons of these places that are sort of, on the one hand, tourist destinations, and then also are selling these sort of elixirs out with kind of good health medicinal purposes. Lynch and Clark was the name on that bottle. So the company changes through time. And that's a very similar thing to what we do with ceramics, is we figure out the manufacturer, and these manufacturers often they'll form a company for 5 or 10 years, and then they'll reform with somebody else, and then they'll reform with somebody else. So, you might have like Thomas and John Clues, and then it's just Thomas Clues, and then it's just John Clues, and they have these really tight date ranges. So the bottles have that too, which is really fun. I did want to show you all this one. This is that flared rim pharmaceutical bottle. And I think he's just beautiful. This one was actually found whole, but it got broken by archaeologists, and we were able to, Ben actually glued it all back together. But it has this lovely pounce mark, so it's real rough on the bottom, so you can see that it was definitely hand done. And even though it's flat at the top, it's still a little wonky. It's not a perfect 90-degree angle, so it's got these lovely imperfections, but it's just this lovely little pharmaceutical bottle, and so thin and so delicate. So finding fragments of these is often, they're just so super tiny that there's not a ton that we can figure out from them. But on occasion, they also have similar embossing and marks as well. Okay, Best way to clean old glass.
Mary, I didn't know that.
Water.
I didn't know that archaeologists broke things.
Shh. It happens. Sometimes you'll find a mend that is now an artifact count went from 1 to 2 because of a trowel or a shovel or rolling off a table or things like that. And you know what? When you work in people's trash, it's okay. So, you know, decorative arts curators and fine arts curators, they never break anything. Ever, ever, ever. But when we break stuff, nobody really cares because it's already broken usually. Cleaning glass water is going to be just kind of your best bet. Being delicate, we use just water and toothbrushes here. And this relates to the next question is the glass cloudiness. So this one, you can see that it is pretty cloudy. And that's the patina. And we really try to preserve the patina. So you can see it on a piece like that. A clear glass is going to look very cloudy. It might have a little bit of an iridescent to it. Olive green glass can turn gold. It can look almost entirely gold or having kind of a oil slick iridescence, while aqua glass or colorless glass is going to have more of like a pastel rainbow iridescence to it. And that is the patina. So it's actually a chemical reaction that's causing the glass to break down. But it can be a really important clue for us. One, I think it's really beautiful and adds a really interesting component to the glass. But two, you don't want to scrub it off because you're actually scrubbing off pieces of the glass itself. But three, it can help us figure out certain things. So a question that we had sort of pondered in our brain was when they're making the bottles with the bottle seals on it, do they just make a bunch of bottles and then attach a bunch of bottle seals way later? But what we have found is the sort of patterning of the patina from the bottles to the bottle seals to the pieces they're attached to is the same. So that chemically they're the exact same glass, which suggests it's all being happened like they're blowing the bottle and they're using the same glass to put the seal on it right away, which also makes sense because you've got this nice warm bottle is accepting of a seal rather than doing it after the bottle's completely hard, cool, sat around for a while, and then you have to reheat it to attach it. But kind of looking at that chemical breakdown and seeing that it's the same chemical reaction is happening at the same rate is really helpful, because not every piece of olive green glass from the 17 and 1800s gets that bright gold patina. Not every piece of glass patinas in the same way or at the same rate. Part of that's the soil, part of that's the exposure, but part of that is the actual chemical makeup of the glass itself. And it's, I'm putting on my, oh gosh, what was that 10th grade chemistry hat on right now to talk about this. But I think that's really helpful for us to understand on a very like visual basic level. We can see that they're having similar chemical reactions. So is glass production limited to specialty shops or pervasive like furniture production? That's a really good question. Glass production was pretty large glass production was pretty large scale because so much glass is being produced. Certainly it's going to happen in different ways, but I think it would be very similar to ceramic production in sort of the amount that would need to be produced and sort of the large, because so much is being on demand. Furniture, I mean, if you just sort of think about how many, even in a large house, you have, even in the biggest house, you might have 10 beds, but how many glass bottles are you going to have in that same house? It's going to be in the hundreds. Or how many drinking glasses are you going to have? It's going to be significantly more than you're going to have a lot, dining room tables. So kind of comparing it that way, I think would be the best comparison from my perspective. Was the Madison wine bottle made in the US or where was it made? I think they were made in England. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah, the English wine bottle glass, especially the olive green.
Yeah. So.
But was it bottled in the US or was it bottled there and sent to the US?
Would have been bottled and sent, most likely, all in one purchase. So you're not just buying a bottle with nothing in it. You're buying the bottle with wine in it and then having it sent. And then you can reuse that bottle with wine that is then imported from wherever you want it to be. My understanding is that after Jefferson went to France, he no longer purchased wine by the barrel because he was very particular about his wine, and buying it by the barrel invited tampering in a way that bottles don't. But Madison didn't seem to share that particularity. He also didn't, while he drank French wines, he drank wines from all over the world. We talk mostly about Madeira. They drank a lot of Madeira, but they also drank wines from South America. They drank wines from France. They drank wines really from quite a few places. Glass was not made at Montpelier. So that was not something that we have any evidence archaeologically or historically to say that it was made here. It's been made in large manufacturing places. Cool.
Plus, there's no sand, so they'd have to gather up a lot of clay to get all that quartz.
Yeah. Or you would be importing a lot of sand. Which would probably maybe even be more expensive than importing the bottles. Does anybody else have any other questions? Or are there any questions that maybe I missed in the chat?
No, I was trying to show Matt a bottle that I have, and I'll start looking at the mouth and everything that you were talking about, and it's interesting. This is a Listerine bottle, and it was on the George Washington plantation.
Very cool.
Yeah, and this is another one with a cork. Yeah, but I'm not sure exactly what. I think they're from George Washington plantation as well.
When you were talking about identifying glass using your teeth or your fingernails, if you put it in your teeth, what does that tell you if you put it up against your teeth?
So I'm the only one in the lab, so this is not a COVID violation, and I promise I will sanitize afterwards. But if you take a piece of glass and you bang it against your teeth, or even if you bite on it, it feels different than plastic.
Oh,
and that's the biggest thing. So like glass pings, you hear that?
Okay.
And plastic thuds.
Yeah.
And often, and particularly when you're getting into 20th century sites, it becomes really important to be able to tell the difference, especially with like when you get Bakelite in and sort of all these weird kind of man-made materials. Sometimes it's really difficult to tell the difference between them. And I'll tell you, like when we were first looking at the carnelian ring, we all were banging it against our teeth because it was so beautiful, where everybody's like, oh, this has got to be plastic, like, or some sort of thing. And then it's like, well, no, it's pinging. Is it glass? And then we figured out it was stone, but it's really that thud versus a pink. The other thing with glass when you're identifying it, so this is a really good piece. People want to look at the color and they always want to look at it here, but you actually want to look at the edges to identify the color. And that helps you because when you've got that patina, it can sometimes hide it, but you're not going to get patina really on the broken side. You also want to always hold the glass up to the light to really see it, because some of that dark olive green glass will look almost black. And people often confuse it with ceramics because they're like, oh, I can't see through it. But if you hold it up to the light, all of a sudden you can, or on the very edges. One of the other things that I think is really important is glass color varies along the whole bottle. So the base often looks much darker than like the shoulder because the glass is thicker. So when we're doing like mending of bottles, sometimes it's really, we almost get caught in ceramics mode when we're like, oh, this color's off from that. So they couldn't possibly go together. But in a bottle, having that color variation makes a lot of sense because the thicker the glass, the darker the color, and sort of so on. So really kind of trying to look at a bottle holistically can be sort of challenging when you have very, very small pieces and there's not a lot of decoration, things like that. Okay. So a question about glass disease. I don't know what glass disease is. So I don't know. Let's see.
I bet it's patina.
I think that's just patina. I think that
Mhm.
so that's again, it's that chemical reaction of the glass starting to break down, and there's no real way to stop it except for to put it in a stabilized environment. If the glass has been, for example, on a shipwreck, there you can desalinate it, so take the salts out to prevent it from getting more corroded over time and destructing. But for stuff that's just kind of found in the ground or antiques, there's not really a good way to reverse it, because again, if you scrub it off, you're actually taking those little pieces of the glass off with it. So keeping it in a stable environment. So your house is probably one of the most stable environments, because you're going to have relative stable humidity as well as temperature. So you don't want to put it maybe in a window that gets super, super, super hot sun all afternoon, because if it's, let's say, a manganese has manganese in it, it might turn purple. Something like that might affect the glass. Now, if you think that's cool, great. But you know, when we're going to take care of any artifact, we always want to keep light at a minimum, humidity at a stable rate, and not too humid, a temperature at a stable rate. So basically, if it's comfortable for you, it's comfortable for the artifacts. If it's too hot for you or too cold for you, it's too hot or too cold for the artifacts. And away from pests. Glass is pretty stable, and it's not that attractive to pests. So it's one that survives actually quite well. Excellent. Are there any more questions? Well, thank you all for coming on this glass journey with me. I love glass. I think it's super fun. I always get excited when I remember how much I like bottles, which happens, you know, kind of once a year when I get ready to teach folks how to catalog them. I highly recommend you check out those websites. Matt's recording this, so of course it's going to go up on our Digital Doorway website, so you can revisit them, or if you want to shoot me an email, I can send you the links again. The next, do you know what this is? I'm going to be co-doing it with Barney Pavo Zuckerman, who is the chairman of the anthropology department at the University of Maryland, and she is a zooarchaeologist. And so she specializes in animal bones, and she has done or overseen her students do almost all of the faunal analysis that's been done at Montpelier over how many years, Matt? Have you been sending stuff to Barney?
20 years now. So.
20 years now. So she has this amazing wealth of knowledge, that because she has either seen these bones or overseen the student theses that have been produced off of these. She's also a lovely human. So be on the lookout for that next one, because I'm excited, because I know I'm going to learn a lot from it. And so I'm going to kind of just be like, this is the basics. And then she's going to tell you the really good stuff. So
Yeah.
Thank you. Wonderful
thanks,
show.
everyone.
That
Thanks,
was
Mary.
good. That was really good.
Yeah, another
Yeah.
great Mary presentation.
Yeah, that was awesome.
It's so nice to see you guys.
Thank you, Mary.
Good to see you. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Take care. Be well.
Bye-bye.